Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This week, we wanted to chat about, in celebration of International Women's Day coming up this weekend, we wanted to talk a little bit about how our hats have evolved with time. Now, what am I talking about? The multiple different hats that we wear as women these days in comparison to probably a couple of decades ago, if not just a few decades ago, I think has evolved majorly. And sometimes I forget to actually sit back and look at how free I am to be able to choose a life that's not necessarily shaped by like motherhood, not really be impacted by the pressure of having to like choose between a job and motherhood, and also just be able to take on, like, for example, right now I'm technically running a business where I have like 10,000 different hats. And a couple of decades ago, there were a couple of these hats, like, for example, the financial and the business ones, that I probably wouldn't, not only would I have not been able to wear, but I would have been like legally prohibited from wearing. Because I know that in the last century, we weren't allowed to open bank accounts. We weren't allowed to like sign off on deeds. We weren't allowed to really allow ourselves to be the authority in any business, finance, or I guess like wealth building situation as a whole. So I think maybe we can talk a little bit about how being a multi hyphenate these days is actually such a big thing to celebrate because we simply were not allowed to do it. And I know, Farah, that you are probably similar to me in terms of like you wear loads of different hats. I mean, you 100% wear different hats just because of the fact that you run like maybe two or I think two different businesses right now, right?
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. I mean, along the same vein, but I have my like own social media and content along with like all the wedding
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like
content that I
counting
do.
that as two
So
businesses.
yeah, I would they're kind of in a similar industry, but yeah, definitely very different businesses. And how I approach them is obviously very different because one is more client focused than the other. But no, I think it is really cool and it actually blows my mind actually realizing how little time it's been since women have been in power of their own lives. It always shocks me when I remember, I think it was Girls That Invest posted about the last the last time a woman wasn't allowed to open a bank account without their husband like signing off on it was in the 1970s or something,
Yeah,
which
I didn't
is
want to throw out a
really
figure because I couldn't remember. I think it was
it
something like
was
that.
yeah, which really isn't that long ago, which is kind of scary. But it's also weird to think because it not that much time has passed, so there still is a lot of rhetoric around like what spaces women should be in and shouldn't, and like what their role is, even to this day. We've definitely come a long way. But then I hear people like Grace Beverly talk about how difficult it's been for her to get like funding for her businesses and all the stats around people that invest in businesses that are women founded or women run, and how many big businesses are that field in general is so male dominated because people just won't back the businesses that are female led, which is also really crazy, um and kind of hinders like the growth in that area. But I still think like women like her still being so like business oriented and like creating incredible businesses and being the founders and trying to like carve that path so that other women can follow and actually get the backing that they need to create like multi-million and like huge enterprises themselves. I think seeing stuff like that is also really inspiring because it just makes you realize there's a lot that's possible in today's day and age for a woman. And I do forget sometimes that actually in the generations before, like it literally legally wasn't allowed. Like it wasn't that they just chose that life. They actually like did not have that choice. And I think that is what's crazy to me. But I do also feel like in like our day and age, like there's this TikTok that I saw a bit ago, and it was something along the lines of the 40-hour work week, or the way that the work life was created was based on one person being able to spend all their time working and one spending all their time looking after the household. But now in our day and age, you've got two people in the same household doing all those hours of work. But then women typically are still expected like upkeep that second job essentially. And it was just kind of talking about how they were both existing jobs before, like very distinct jobs. And now there's always this like constant discourse around like who should be responsible for the chores at home and like taking care of the household, and that being a job in itself. And in our generation, it's not really recognized as a job anymore to actually take care of your home, to do everything outside of just like doing your 9 to 5 or like your business or whatever work, whatever you call work. Nothing outside of that is like considered a job or work, even though we literally employ people to do those things as well, if you have the funds to. So it's interesting, like as women have been given more power over like what they do for work or like how they choose to spend their time, the thing that they was considered work before is not considered work anymore, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because like that is definitely one of the hats a lot of women wear. And you know what? I kind of want to challenge a little bit because like if I got to take care of my home, like if that was like something where I don't see it as a chore and it's something that I maybe had more time to do or made more time to do, I feel like I would enjoy it a lot because I really like curating my space, cleaning my space, like putting effort and like actual labor into where I live, and like even cooking. So like cooking, cleaning, going out and getting food, all of these elements of like being, I don't know, like a caretaker or like a, is that the right word? That's not the right word. Being a housewife? I'm
I
not
guess so. Homemaker.
homemaker. Homemaker, that's what
Maker.
I was trying to find. Like I actually really enjoy that hat of mine when I feel like I get to do it. Whereas 99% of the time I feel like it is a chore and I don't like doing it. And we do like split that labor, like me and my partner. So it is like it's good. I like that you've brought up that it actually is a hat that women wear and it needs to count as one of those hats. Like it's one of the layers of multi-hyphenates, I think, that especially if you enjoy it. But I wanted to also talk about like why do you think it's more common to be a multi-hyphenate these days? Because I feel like it's definitely like more of a thing in the last like 5 to 10 years. Especially if I just look at it from the lens of like how one makes money or like makes a living. Like maybe 5, 10 years ago, being a freelancer or doing contract work, I feel like was not so common, and like it's also not as stable. But it's so much more common now to have like all these different things that you do, all these different hats that you wear, and also have a lot of them, or maybe more than one of them, make you money. And like even for me, for example, like I've become multi-hyphenate in the last 5 years, just purely because of becoming a content creator and realizing that like there's so many different ways to earn a living, and that in itself has allowed me to define myself through like loads of different roles. So like I understand finances, I understand business, I understand marketing, and I can like confidently say that I'm like definitely multi-hyphenate, but I don't know if this version of myself would have been accepted, especially as a woman, like, I don't know, 20 years ago. Like, would I have been deemed like someone who was flaky or like doing too much or couldn't commit to something or was, like not settling in one discipline or becoming good at one thing? Because I feel like there's different expectations on women when it comes to like being a jack of all trades versus being good at one thing. I don't know if you feel that or if I'm just kind of, I'm too deep in this like industry where it's like I feel like a lot more men are doing loads of things and being praised for all their different skills, whereas when women are doing it, it's kind of like it's not praised in the same way.
Yeah, I kind of get what you're saying, but I do think it comes down to the fact that men traditionally were the ones that were going out and making the money. So they were already in that field, whereas women being a bit more new to it, I think not as like welcome to do one thing, never mind like multiple. So
Yeah, it's
like the
true.
fact that we just have one job is a step up from what it was like 20 years ago, like you said. So, but I also think 20 years ago, it didn't exist. Like I don't know how it would have been possible to do that many things, because if I think about what like the working world looked like, it was very much like people had a full-time job and that was it. Nobody was doing anything on the side. They were going home, eating their food, going to bed and doing the same thing the next day. Like I don't really think it existed that you would go home and do your 5 to 9 where you'd like do a side hustle, like, and create a business. And there was a good few people that did that, which is why we have the things that we have today, but it just wasn't very common. I think nowadays it's a lot more common, and I almost think that's probably because of like the economy though as well. Like people actually need more money and like more means to actually survive.
Yeah.
Things are so much more
I need that.
expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, you actually need to take on a bit more, because even when it comes down to, when I mention like, if traditionally women stayed at home and the men worked, these days a lot of the time people can't even afford to do that even if they wanted to. Like you have to have two incomes a lot of the time. um but I think what also potentially makes women more multi-hyphenate these days is because, particularly if they enter motherhood and they can't really physically go back to work yet, or now they have responsibility of a child, they kind of have to be a bit inventive with like how they make their money and maybe do something at home, and they start building. Like I've seen a lot of stories of women online who actually started their businesses while they're pregnant or while they're on maternity leave, because they weren't actually at work, which they were working, and then they took leave to have their baby, and that's actually when their businesses were born as well, because they had that time, but also they needed the flexibility to be able to be their own boss and work on their own terms, so that they could manage the hat of being a mum, also the hat of being someone that needs to earn a living for their household. Because it's not enough these days, I don't think, to just like live off one income in your home. So I think that's probably a big reason as well. But then also like people our age, I think it's just very encouraged these days. Like a lot of people don't really enjoy the corporate lifestyle, like typically, and people aren't really as accepting of it as much. Like I feel like before, people were very much like, oh, this is the way it is. Like you pick a job and you stick at it for 50 years. Whereas in society these days, I think it's very much more flexible. You don't feel like you need to stay at a job forever. In fact, I'm pretty sure the advice these days is to make sure you switch your job every 2 years.
Yeah.
Like you are told to do that, otherwise you remain stagnant and then you're not progressing. And we're almost taught the opposite. And I think that also potentially puts pressure on us as women to make sure that we're not falling behind. Because I feel like we can feel like that a lot if we're not pushing ourselves and not like keeping up with things, like we're going to fall behind. So we make sure that we're on top of things like that, making sure we've got all the side hustles, making sure we've got all the skills, making sure we're doing like everything and like exceeding our limits, because we don't want to like fall behind or like waste opportunity. And I feel like that's ingrained almost, maybe because of generations before. You know how in they say like in your DNA, like even if you're not going through something yourself, it's still in your like DNA. So like say for example, women in generations before us physically weren't able to do this stuff but really, really wanted to and had that drive and like had that difficult time where they legally were not allowed. That kind of like, I don't know, emotion has like been passed down almost. So
Yeah, I've heard of that.
in our generation, it's like we have that drive and like that need to like go out and do stuff independently and for ourselves, which also might play a part in why we feel the need to like do so many things at the same time, because the opportunity wasn't there before to do any of it.
Yeah. And I feel like the other thing is like when you said about, okay, corporate, it's like, oh, you kind of feel pressure to go down that route. And I feel like there's almost more like not problems, but there's more issues you face as a woman in corporate versus when you're potentially like multi-passionate or multi-hyphenate, where like you're actually choosing a lot of your disciplines when you're not in a corporate role, and you get to pick and choose like where you get to show up and like almost like who you have to deal with. Whereas in corporate, there's so like we've probably spoken about it in previous episodes in terms of like glass ceilings. There's a little bit of sexism. There's a little bit, quote unquote, racism, othering, like all of these. And look, I won't even like mention the kind of bias against taking like maternity leave, coming back, all of these things that exist in corporate if you're a woman. So those things are also like, well, it's actually easier to just maybe pick a few things that you're good at these days and like find a more flexible way to actually turn them into like ways to make a living.
The lifestyle of someone that is multi-hyphenate and juggling multiple different things, I think that suits women more in general. Just because if you're thinking of things from a feminine perspective, it's all about being in flow state, being creative, and managing things in like not so rigid way, which I think lends well to not stick into this really strict schedule of being in a 9 to 5 and that's all I do, and this like really rigid routine. Being able to weave in and out of like different roles, and I think women are naturally quite good at that, which is why it lends well in a career perspective as well to not necessarily stick to one type of career. And I think maybe women naturally like have ended up, because of the trends and in general, I feel like we've naturally taken on that automatically because of our need to be in our feminine energy a bit more, in terms of you'll have maybe your traditional role that you do because that's, especially as South Asians, like that's what you're kind of coached to do anyway. Go into a corporate job, become a doctor, become a lawyer, become someone in those types of fields. But then a lot of us have started to realize like, oh, we can do that, but then also get the best of both worlds and do something creative and what we enjoy and what fulfills us. And we've created this extra hat in order to kind of fulfill that part of ourselves that is necessary. So I think it's actually important for women to explore that and not necessarily feel like they have to be boxed in to a career. And it's like, it's amazing that we get the opportunity to do that. Like we were talking about at the beginning, not even be able to get one job in, I don't know, a good couple 10 years ago. We now have the opportunity to get multiple different like avenues of income, and I think it also lends well to women just becoming more financially independent. Like the more that you can do without necessarily burning yourself out, you know, taking on too much, but the more streams of income you can build and the more you can stand on your own 2 feet financially is so beneficial as a woman, because obviously that wasn't even allowed, I don't know, 70 years ago, however long it's been. So for you to take full advantage of that and actually get multiple streams of income now and make sure that you're secure financially and not have to rely on a man or anyone else in your life, it puts you in a really good position. It allows you to make choices in your life. And even though the pressure and everything that comes with kind of juggling all those things is there, it also gives you a lot of power and a lot of like freedom in life as well. And I think that's why we are so drawn to like making sure we are experiencing everything and making sure that we are taking on these roles, and we always want to do everything to the best of our ability as well, which is probably why as women we struggle with juggling too much sometimes as well, because you want to take all these things on but you also want to make sure you're the absolute best at doing them. You don't want to half-ass anything. So that's when the kind of well-being side, like you have to figure out as well like how you're going to manage doing all these things, also potentially being a mother or caretaker of your home if that's like you are the person that are responsible for that, which these days it shouldn't be. I feel like in a partnership it's quite common these days to have both people in the household like taking care of the home, because both people typically work now. But I feel like even like the mental load that we've talked about in other episodes and the kind of extra tasks, maybe household wise or otherwise, do kind of end up falling on the woman's head. So that's when you kind of have to figure out how you're going to manage all of those things all at once, which can be a lot, but I don't know, it's hard to not like realize the privilege of it as well and be like, I get to, you know, that whole affirmation of like, I get to do this, not I have to.
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's what I kind of meant by like earlier when I was like, I actually love I love the process and the task of taking care of my home, but it's only when I have that overwhelming feeling of like I get to do this rather than like treating it like a chore.
Yeah. But I think the difficulty is the fact that because that you are now working, like in traditional times, you wouldn't have actually had any other
Yeah, so
responsibility.
it would have been your
Whereas
job.
now it's more of a chore because you have to fit it in amongst like everything else that you're doing, which makes it more difficult and more like, oh, I have to.
Yeah.
But
That actually reminded me when you were talking about how like I feel like it's mostly women who are multi-hyphenate. I was actually thinking that exact thing. Like a lot of the like I've made it a point to like the content I consume online is mostly from multi-passionate women just because like I like having that influence on me where like I can see people thriving doing multiple different things. And I don't know if it's because I seek it out or if it's because like I don't know, like attracts like in terms of even like algorithms and stuff. But I feel like it's more women who are multi hyphenate. And I'm probably making a huge gender bias right now, but I feel like with all like I listen to a lot of podcasts that are run by like men, and they talk about like different things like business and fitness and creativity and all that stuff. But I feel like the same 3 or 4 topics come up when like men talk about what they do or like what they monetize or like what they're interested in. Whereas with women, I just feel like the range in which we are like the multi in the multi hyphenate is just so like wide. Like people are interested in so many different things, and whether you monetize or create a living out of any of those things is up to you. But I just feel like women are actually more of the gender that actually manage being multi hyphenate a lot more so than men, which I think what you were saying about like we naturally are more inclined to do that. It gives us more flexibility and we're kind of naturally seeking a bit more flexibility, especially when it gets to like certain points in our lives when we actually need the flexibility, like having a child or something like that. Or actually even balancing like home take I forgot what we called it
homemaking.
homemaking balancing homemaking and then like you said like because homemaking is a hat, you actually have to balance like the self-care and the like rest and stuff like that as well, especially if we're talking about like doing things or pursuing things that allow us to be more in our feminine. That means you're also like by default prioritizing the rest, the slowness as part of being able to thrive in all the different like layers of your life that you have going on at the same time. So that was interesting. Like I didn't really clock that a lot of the people that I consume content from who are multi hyphenates are women. And they also define it like that as well. Like this is again just me generalizing based on like how I personally consume content, but like for example with the men, it's like a podcast or a YouTube channel is based on like a specific thing, whereas with women, I don't know, I feel like we have a really great way of like also finding the through line between all of the different things that we do, like what is the common thread, and like bringing it all together and like allowing different parts of ourselves to come out in different ways based on what we're doing, rather than all the things being like different like hard lines between what we do. And I'm definitely in the process of like trying to figure that out, and like that's also what made me feel like at the beginning of my, I guess, like either content creation journey or like self-employment, I had that overwhelming feeling of like I'm interested in too many different things, like I'm doing too much, like I need to pick something so I don't quote unquote fall behind or do anything like that. But I have now slowly kind of I'm going through the process of like finding the through line and like finding these natural strengths that I have that have attracted different hobbies or different like businesses that potentially like pull out similar strengths that I already have. So it's really interesting, I think, like embracing this lifestyle and like this mindset towards earning an income, earning a diversified income, and then also building like quite a flexible life, which I think women are just really good at doing right now.
What you were talking about really reminds me of the whole like debate around content creators finding a niche and having to stick to a particular niche with their content and going with that, because that's something that you get kind of told or is a very big topic of conversation in that like area of like work, I guess. And it's also interesting that you say like women are better at and more I don't know, more women you find online are multi-hyphenate. But I think in general, social media and like being a content creator is probably one of the only like biggest industries at the moment that women are. There's majority of women
Oh
that
yeah,
kind
that is
of
a stat. Yeah.
do that. And then when I remember the first time I kind of heard that said, because it's kind of a bit obvious, but not really. Um, until someone actually like, yeah, puts a stat in your face and is like, oh, actually, yeah, majority of women do have this as a job. Um, but it's also a job that's really like trivialized, which funnily enough is because majority of women do it. So I feel like a lot of the things we as women do as like work, we almost also class as like hobbies, or we don't really call them work a lot of the time. At least I've noticed for me, it took me a very long time to consider or even just like call my social medias my job and like actual work versus, oh, this is a hobby, this is just something I do on the side for fun. And it was on the side and it was for fun for a long time, but it was also work that whole time as well, and I was always very afraid to call it work. But I think that was because I think very women focused things, or things that are majority women focused, are often seen as a bit like,
Oh, it's a
I don't know,
fun
frivolous,
hobby.
or
Yeah.
yeah, just like not taken seriously. But actually, like, we are businesswomen right now, even though the content is seemingly something that's mocked a little bit even now, even though it's quite normalized now as well.
I feel like that's so interesting because like I've had conversations with friends before where they'll tell me about this like hobby that's like really cool of theirs, and they actually like, especially these like labor related hobbies where like I had a friend who like she knitted like little things, but they were really cute, like unique things. Like she'd knit like little like Stanley Cup holder things and like gloves and cute hats, and they were really cute. And she just did them for all of her friends and family, and like she went through a phase of like selling them on Etsy. And I asked her, I was like, why did you not like turn it into a proper side hustle? Because she was also someone who was not very happy in her job and was like, like could have probably done with having like a little side business or a different way to earn income. And when I was pressing on like, why didn't you like expand on the Etsy or like maybe start social media for it, she was really adamant about not wanting to turn it into a business and not wanting to like monetize something that she really enjoyed doing. And I feel like we're also like quite, well, how do I phrase this? Like, you know how earlier you were saying we obviously have a desire to be in our feminine, like we need that as part of our life, right? And I feel like we're also maybe quite good at like avoiding too many masculine heavy like roles potentially. And I don't know if that's like how we end up finding all of these like hobbies and parts of ourselves that are so different, because maybe we are chasing like enjoyment, being in our feminine, just like being creative, not having to like monetize stuff and turn it into a business. Or whether we're just like, because our hobbies and things we're interested in are trivialized so much, whether we're like instant like knee-jerk reaction to turning something into a business or being quote unquote more masculine with something is like like rejected in our brain, because we're like, oh, we don't want to, like, this can't be trivial anymore, or like if I do this then I'm like suddenly not going to be in my feminine. I don't know if that's like coming across the way that I thought in my head, but
No, I do get what you're saying. And I think it's probably a bit of both, because I think, at least for me, like I had those same thoughts when just before I became like a full-time content creator, but I realized for me it's just stemmed from like the lack of confidence that I could actually make money from it and like sustain myself just through that alone. So I would tell myself that I'm worried because I don't want it to become serious, but I didn't feel like it actually could become serious. That's why I would have that fear. But I also understand the point where if you're adding an extra, I don't know, like objective towards like just like a standard hobby, like something you actually enjoy, to make money from it and putting that pressure on it, and then having to treat it like a business, that is putting yourself more in your masculine for something that was probably giving you more feminine, like allowing you to be in your feminine before. So I get that that's probably something innate that we do maybe as women as well, is like try and differentiate the two and make sure we still have space to be in our feminine with like our hobbies and things that we're passionate about and can be creative in. and not necessarily have to feel the need to constantly like make money out of those things, which I think is also a healthy thing to do. I don't really advocate for turning every single hobby of yours into something that you can make money from. I think there's always a balance in life, and there is things that you should just leave for pure enjoyment. And that's probably something that I've struggled with for sure, is not feeling this constant need, or if I'm good at something, or if I found like something that I can do and potentially make money from, then why don't I make the money from it? And I've had to really, in the last couple of years, really hone in on the things that I can have a good balance with, where I enjoy and I make the money, aka like my content. But then there will be other things I need to now create, hobbies that I purely do for enjoyment, and that's where I'm actually gonna tap into and give time to as well. Um, but yeah, I think it's a bit of both, and I think having those two, that balance of like things that you do for work, but also not that you have to do a creative job though as a woman. I just think you have to have an outlet at some point.
Yeah, you have to pursue multiple things.
Yeah.
'Cause I
But
think,
I think that's why we are multifaceted, because then we need that to allow us to then like still have that outlet, also get done what we need to get done.
yeah, it's like more embracing that natural inclination you might have to pursue different things rather than thinking in your head, like, oh, does this make me like flaky? Does this make me indecisive? No, it just makes you human, because at the end of the day, like, pursuing different passions is the same thing as like finding fulfillment, because you're just finding different ways to like feel good about life. Because like, not to bring it down to like a very deep like philosophical thing, but like time is always passing, right? So like if you're just constantly filling up that time with things you just enjoy doing, and then some of them you enjoy also doing and making money from, you will be more fulfilled. And I remember I made a video like a while ago, and I had to do some research around like having hobbies and the connection with hobbies, between hobbies and like your actual levels of happiness and purposefulness and stuff. And people who have hobbies, whether they're monetized or not, like if you have multiple hobbies, you're more likely to be happy later on in life, because then your happiness isn't dependent on like your job or your income. It's like a way to force your focus to be dispersed. It's almost like being multi-hyphenate is literally like putting all of your eggs in like different little baskets, and like allowing each basket to like give you little, I don't know, like happiness boosts every now and then, instead of having all of your eggs in like one basket, which might be your job, which has like a yearly performance review. And I remember those feelings of like when I didn't really clock that all of my validation came from external external people and stuff. Like all of my eggs were in my corporate career basket. I had no hobbies. I had no hobbies. It's actually crazy to think about that. And therefore, if things went wrong at work, my feeling of fulfillment, my thoughts of myself, and like my confidence, my creativity, all of these things were just on the floor. So regardless of like whether these things help you make money or not, it's actually, yeah, like you said, like it's just a great way to actually find fulfillment or not. And see what you said also about like having to monetize everything. I just wanted to say as well, because I have that pressure as well, of every time I think I'm good at something, I'm like, it's money on the table. I need to make it. I can't leave it there. And what I've been doing recently, like, well, ever since I left my corporate job, is I've actually just been like going ahead and like, if I'm good at something, I'm going to see if I can make money from it. And if I feel like making money from it has sucked all the energy to do that thing, I'll just stop and keep it as a hobby. And I think that's a great, like for me, it's just been like a great way to test it, because with my mind, if I leave something on the table and I never know, I'll just crumble later on. Whereas right now, I'd rather like, yeah, I'd rather just like figure out if like I've hated monetizing something, or if it should, if I've tried and I know I don't like it being monetized, I can keep it as a hobby. And right now I think I'm kind of doing that with fitness in terms of like the fitness content, because I've really enjoyed my fitness journey in the last year has been super fulfilling, and I'm going to try and make more content with it. And if I find that like it's taking the enjoyment out of my actual life and like activity and stuff, I'll just like slowly wean it out. So I've got like a little plan of testing it. If you feel like you're someone who's interested in a lot of different things, I feel like this is a great sign and stage in life, and also like society, to embrace all of those things, and really like celebrate yourself for being someone who is pursuing all your different interests, whether you're monetizing them or not. It's going to leave you with a more fulfilled life, I think. And also, we couldn't do all this crap before, so may as well just take advantage of it. Have fun. Yeah. So if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to give us a rating and follow us. And if you're watching or listening on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video and leave us a comment telling us all the things you're interested in or passionate about. I would love to know. I think the array of things are just crazy, and like I love knowing what everyone's interested in. But yeah, that's us, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye.